Hi there. So last week I recorded a video about calculating loan forgiveness under the Paycheck Protection Program. And so today I wanted to record a video about some of the questions we still don't have answers to. So we have the basic framework on how to calculate forgiveness, but there are still a lot of what ifs. And we're still waiting on guidance. And until we get that guidance, it's going to be difficult to really figure out what to do, but we have to make those decisions now. So there are a ton of questions that we don't have answers to, but I just wanted to go over what I consider to be maybe the top 5 questions that we still need answers when it comes to particularly loan forgiveness under the PPP program. So let's just jump right in. So my first question that I would have is the method that we have for calculating expenses. Do we use a cash basis or accrual basis? And what I mean by that, so the forgiveness is based on the costs incurred and payments made within the 8-week covered period. So the date that you get the funds, and then the following 8 weeks, any costs incurred during that period are part of the forgiveness calculation. But my question being, does that mean that it's all payments made during that period? What happens if you have costs that are accrued during that period? So an example of that, if you get the funds on a Thursday and then you pay payroll on that Friday, usually that payroll is going to cover a prior period, but maybe the prior 2 weeks. Is all of that payroll included in this 8-week covered period, or is it only the Friday because that's the first day after you've gotten the funds? We don't have an answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. Another example, for rent, can you prepay any rent? Let's say your 8-week cover period ends on, say, May 31st. Can you pay June's rent on May 31st and have it be covered during this 8-week covered period? Can you prepay June and July? I don't know. I think for right now, what I am advising people is that it's probably going to be cash basis, meaning if you cut a check during that 8-week period or you pay something during that 8-week period, that it'll be covered. You don't want to, I don't think, go overboard. I wouldn't prepay 2 months rent, for instance. I wouldn't. I think if you pay June's rent in May, I think you're probably okay. If you normally pay it the week before it's due, I wouldn't think that you could pay 6 months rent and be covered. Same thing with payroll. I wouldn't prepay a bunch of payroll. I don't think that's going to be covered. But if you run payroll on the Friday after you receive funds, and then run payroll again on the very last day, I think you should be fine. But until we get guidance, we can't be sure. The next question I think that I would have is around the reduction for the decrease in employee count. So this is the full-time equivalent reduction. So as it states now, the forgiveness is reduced if your full-time equivalent employees are reduced. So if you have fewer full-time equivalents during the 8-week period than you did prior, then the forgiveness is going to be reduced. But what they don't specify, we can guess, but what they don't specify is, can you replace, in this case, 2 15-hour per week employees? So what would be 1 full-time equivalent, but 2 people? Can you replace that with 1 full-time employee? Or could you even take one of those 2 employees and put them on full-time and then not bring back the other person? And then even more, I guess importantly, can you, say, replace an employee with a friend or a relative to increase your headcount? If somebody doesn't come back, can you hire your child? Can you hire your spouse? Can you hire a friend to replace them and still have that count towards the full-time equivalent? There isn't anything right now prohibiting that. I would think if it gets out that that's happening a lot, that they might start prohibiting it. But we don't have answers on that. I would think at this point, since they do specify full-time equivalent, that it is truly full-time equivalent, and it is based on yes, you can replace 2 part-timers with a full-timer if the math works. Yes, you could hire a relative to replace somebody for this particular test, but we don't know for sure. So we need some guidance on this for sure. The next big question that I have revolves around the reduction for the wage decrease. So that, in a nutshell, if you reduce any individual employee's wages during this 8-week period compared to the prior, say, Q1, then your forgiveness can be reduced. And this is probably the area that has the most questions in my mind. The SBA did come out this morning. It's Monday. I guess it came out on Sunday, but most people saw it today on Monday that your forgiveness will not be reduced if you attempt to rehire somebody and they choose not to come back. But I think that FAQ that they released actually brings up more questions for me than answers, because I still don't know exactly how this wage decrease is going to work. A couple of questions around it that I would have. What if an employee doesn't return? So let's just say they choose or you choose not to bring them back during this 8-week period. Are they included in the calculation? So basically the calculation says you cannot reduce any individual employee's pay by more than 25%. But there are going to be a lot of people that don't come back during this 8-week period. Like I said, they choose not to come back because of unemployment that they're on. You choose not to bring them back because you have nothing for them to do, or maybe they were laid off even before all this happened. They were an employee in Q1 that doesn't come back during this 8-week period. Do they go in the calculation or not? So there's a question of whether this calculation is done only on people that come back during the 8-week period, or if it's done for everybody that was an employee in Q1. And I think that's going to be a big question that we have to have answers for, because the full-time equivalent test really determines headcount, true headcount, and then the reduction in pay is more about making sure you don't bring people back at a much lower pay. But if I replace 2 part-time employees with 1 full-time employee, I would pass the full-time equivalent test. But what does that mean for the reduction in pay test? I don't know the answer to that. So the next big question I would have is related to the exemption that they have for rehires. So basically, that is the rule that if you have a reduction in headcount or you have a reduction in pay for employees during the 8-week period, if you do bring those back to quote unquote normal by June 30th, then you won't have any reduction in your forgiveness. So it's a bit of a safe harbor there that you're allowed to reduce your employee count or pay during the 8-week period and still get full forgiveness if you bring everybody back by June 30th. But there isn't a lot of guidance on how long that has to last. If you bring everybody back at full pay on June 30th, can you lay them off on July 1st? Can you lay them off on July 15th? I don't know the answer to that. How long they have to be back to normal. If you're relying on this safe harbor, I think we still have a lot of questions that need to be answered before you can really decide if that's the route you want to take. And then the last big question that I have about forgiveness is the funds that are left over on June 30th. So right now, what the CARES Act says is that the loan proceeds can be used for allowable uses, so that's payroll, rent, utilities, during the covered period. The covered period is defined separately as ending on June 30th. So there is some question in my mind about whether or not they will allow you to use any of this money after June 30th. I do know that there are some people who are counting on the ability to use that money after June 30th. So they might use some of it, maybe even none of it, during the 8-week period, knowing that it won't be forgiven. They're fine with that. And then using the money later to pay payroll, rent, and utilities, but after June 30th. Maybe they're completely shut down. There's no reason to bring anybody back. Maybe they don't have really much in the way of rent and utilities. If there might be some people like that, and what they're expecting to be able to use it for is a low-cost loan for once they're back up and running. But I'm still unsure whether or not they'd be able to do that based on the guidance. Whether it's the entire loan or a part of the loan, if you haven't used it for payroll, rent, and utilities by June 30th, I still think that there's a chance they might say you have to pay that money back immediately if it hasn't been used. Not to say that you have to pay the loan back in its entirety, because if you've used some of it, then it does become a loan. But if you haven't used it, if the money is still in your bank account on June 30th, will they require you to send it back to the bank? I think the more and more we hear about businesses that aren't rehiring and are trying to use the money as a low-cost loan for future expenses, the more we hear about that, the more likely it is that the SBA and the Treasury will demand that these money be paid back on June 30th if it hasn't been used. But we don't know for sure right now. I would say most people assume that that's not going to be the case, that they will allow you to use it after June 30th, but we don't know for sure. So we definitely need some guidance on that. So those are basically it. Those are right now the top 5 questions I would have on how this forgiveness is going to work for the PPP loans. Hopefully soon we will hear more. Today is May 4th, so hopefully soon we will hear more, because people are having to make these decisions right now on how to use the money. So we here at Numberwise will try to keep you informed as we hear new things. If you do have any questions, feel free to email me. We do have a COVID-19 resources page on our website at numberwise.net. If you can check that out. This video will be posted there, as well as a couple other videos and blog posts and other resources that we found. But definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.